a look at the use of creative arts in the church, and a behind-the-scenes look at a local pastor. All that and more coming up now on Joy in the City, True Stories. Joy in the City is a program highlighting people and organizations having an impact on our city. All too often, we hear about the problems and the dysfunction in our culture, but we are coming with a different approach as we take a look at the good things going on right here in our community. I'm Lindsay Irvin, and you're about to see what God is doing in our city. Creative arts in the church is more than just a worship team leading our song service, or a vocalist singing a special song. Recently, we were able to talk with Drew Baker about his love of the creative arts and how they can be incorporated into our ministry planning and included in our weekly services.
So Drew, thanks for being here today. I want you to start off by telling us, and I say a little, but your background in the arts goes way back. Mm-hmm. So as brief as you can, just kind of give us some background on that.
So my life in the arts started when I was 4 years old, actually, in a church Christmas pageant, believe it or not. And from there, it just kind of snowballed, and here we are so many years later. I'm not going to tell you how many, but here we are many years later. My experiences had me all over the country, mainly the East Coast, to some big theaters here and there, and then also a lot here in central Pennsylvania. A lot of experience here bringing the arts to this area, this community, the community of Tyrone, most recently in the Iron Bridge Dinner Theater that we had there the last 5 years. It's still going, but COVID kind of put a damper on that. But we've had a lot of great success bringing the arts and building an arts community here in central Pennsylvania.
I'm going to make you tell me a little bit about your time at Sight and Sound.
Okay, yeah.
Because that had to have had a huge impact on where you're at today and given you a lot of experience. So tell me about that.
So actually 20 years ago this month, I was making the move to Sight and Sound Theaters in Lancaster to accept my first professional contract right out of high school at Sight and Sound, where I worked from 2002 to 2003 on the original production of Daniel there. And it was interesting because I went as an actor, but a month prior to moving, I had been in a severe car accident, which hurt my back. I had muddled through and made sure that I wasn't going to complain because here was my dream in front of me. But they had welcomed almost 80 new actors in at that point for that production. So they were actually behind on physicals at that moment. And when all the sets at Sight and Sound 20 years ago were manually pushed by actors, and my back had in one set move given out, and my physical was the next day. I was flat on my back, couldn't do anything. And so, make a long story short, I was pulled from the show. And at that moment, I was crushed. I was like, God, why did you bring me here? Why am I here? I didn't sign a contract. I didn't sign a year lease on an apartment to work at Walmart. And the Lord opened a big opportunity at that time because I was then placed in theater administration. So from my physical ailment, the Lord used that to give me a promotion within the company. And I was able to, at that moment, see how the entire company worked. Because the actual position that I was given, I wasn't guaranteed 40 hours in that position, but they took it upon themselves to give me 40 hours worth of work each week. So I was farmed out to different areas of the company to make up that 40 hours. So I got to see the entire company workings of Sight and Sound. And the Lord really blessed that time then because I was able to build other relationships that I wouldn't have if I was just in the small bubble of the cast. And the Lord has allowed those relationships to continue even to this day.
Is that where the dream for the Iron Bridge started?
So partway through my contract at Sight and Sound, we had started, prior to me leaving for Sight and Sound, I had started a Christian theater company in my senior year of high school. And at that point, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek and just a fun name. We were working under the name Know-A-Lot Productions. And Noahlot Productions, because I like those two biblical names. It wasn't that we knew everything, because we most definitely didn't. The people who remember those productions from the early years, they were almost pathetic. But our heart was right. We were trying to minister the gospel through these productions on very shoestring budget at that time. And so I kind of put that aside, left for Sight and Sound, and halfway through the year, I was at that point also on the board of directors for a national creative arts ministry organization. And so at their conference that year in June, I was praying to the Lord for what the next step was, where I was going to be. And at that moment, he called me and said, I want you to go back to the roots, and laid out the vision at that point to come back and pick up where we had kind of left off. So I thought once I was at Sight and Sound, that was it. That was my career forever. But the Lord had other plans. And so I came back at the end of that contract period and started what we then called Faces and Places Ministries, which was really at the start of that. I was going out in one-man biblical productions. I was portraying different men of the Bible in different church services, different organizations, schools, and that sort of thing. And it really wasn't large group productions. And slowly we started to integrate more large group productions up until the recession hit. And we kind of had a slump in activity, and that's where I took a couple years off doing other jobs here and there. And then in 2010, I was introduced to a couple other people that kind of then snowballed into a working relationship into another company that just built then into the Iron Bridge. So,
And where are we at today with the Iron Bridge? Like, I know that the building has sold, but
Yeah.
where is that ministry at today?
So in 2015, after spending 3 years at Edgewater Acres in Alexandria as our home base, still working under the name of Faces and Places Alive at that point, we decided that the new owners of Edgewater Acres at that point were deciding that they were going to have a different focus, and we at that point were wanting more than just one weekend a month to present productions. And so we went out looking for a facility that would allow us to have restaurant capability for the dinners, and then also give us the opportunity to present shows in a small, intimate space. And stumbled upon a property in Tyrone, started to lease that, and 5 years later, they had sold the property. And so we, in the process of that being put up on the market, we were already in transition to another location, a location that we kind of had our sights set on that was going to be forever home. And during COVID, we unfortunately lost that agreement. The business that was in that location decided to remain open instead of closing and allowing us to take over. So here we are, still with our items in storage, and right now we're kind of dubbing ourselves Iron Bridge Theater on the Wheels because we're using multiple venues to present shows. But we're still going, just kind of assessing the situation that's around us with COVID and seeing what and when people are willing to come out. So we just finished last week a wonderful production of Little Women. And so our goal now, for 5 years that we had the actual facility of the Iron Bridge at the Grangerville Bridge in Tyrone, we kind of were a backdoor ministry. Our ministry was shifted from being kind of in your face with faith-based productions to being kind of backdoor, where a lot of our actors come in from all over the country. And so it was a perfect opportunity to expose those who maybe weren't exposed to a Christian lifestyle, to our staff who were all believers, and prayer before shows, and you name it, and they were able to be exposed to what a Christian lifestyle is. And so we had great success exposing people to the gospel, at least. Not all made decisions to follow Christ, but a lot of people were exposed to it, and we were able to make a difference in those lives that came in and out of our doors. Whereas now, coming out of COVID, I feel that the Lord's really impressing on us to get back to those original roots where we're really bringing the gospel forth creatively. Not always in a biblical style show, but in a show that's faith-based, that has a moral, great message, that has a challenge, that encourages the believer and those who think they're a believer.
And I find that interesting too. And we talked earlier, and I love that fact that you gather actors from all over, and you don't get the opportunity sometimes to pick someone who already is in the faith community. You're
Right.
picking talent,
Right.
and hopefully sowing a seed in those people as you put forth these productions. And I really like that aspect of it.
Yeah, for so long, I was in my own mind saying, okay, you have to be a believer to present this story. And actually, it takes me back to the roots. The very first show we ever did was a show that I wrote, and a very good friend of mine came, and I had known this individual through a community theater, and I didn't know where this person stood faith-wise and belief-wise. And so it was interesting to cast them based on their talent, but to know that through that show, they came around, they had walked away from the Lord, and that was what brought them back to being a believer again. They had walked away, kind of denounced that Christ was all that it was and all that our life needed to depend on. And as a result of being in that show, they were able to come back around and share again in a faith community, share in that salvation story. And so it was really incredible and encouraging to know, a lot of times we put limits on what God can do. Right. And in our creative ministry, we're bringing people in that obviously have a talent, have a good heart, but hopefully planting seeds that will then turn around and bring them into the fold, if you will.
Where do you see yourself in the future?
I'm not sure. Really, it's right now a time of searching, believe it or not. The Iron Bridge is continuing as we have been, not as full force. We're backpedaling. If anything happened during COVID for me, it was for me to take a break and say, hey, you need to take care of some of yourself first, because it was a full-time 19-hour day job for me. And it was really hectic at many times. So right now, we're just trusting the Lord to guide our next step and not rushing him, because I think in the past I had been happy to rush the Lord. And so I'm trying not to rush him. I'm trying to be on his timeline instead of pushing him to be on mine. But we have a couple events coming up, new shows coming up that we're planning. We're trying to write a lot of our material now. Our music director, Jane Pilch, is incredible, and she's writing a lot of original music for some upcoming events, and trying to look at a lot of people in Christian history that answered the call and made an impact as a result of them saying, yes, Lord, I'll serve you. So those sprinkled in with other wholesome, fun shows are going to be making up our next season.
Well, I've watched you for many years in plays here. I've been down to the Iron Bridge. Mm-hmm. Everything you do is top notch.
I appreciate that.
Fantastic.
It's totally the Lord.
Yes.
I can't take credit for any of that. If it wasn't for the talents that he had given me, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And actually, since you brought it up, right after Sight and Sound, I came back, and that's when I got connected here. And that was many eons ago when you were at the former building. But and those years were such impressionable and blessed years for me to partner with you in the creative arts as well. And just to see how the arts can change hearts and lives is impactful to me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Closed captioning for today's program is brought to you by Harry's Construction.
This segment is brought to you by Harry's Construction, whose motto is, if you can dream it, we can create it. They are the kitchen and bath design experts, so call Harry's Construction for all your remodeling needs. Impact Productions, a multi-layer technology company providing on-site, online, and in-studio video services. Contact Impact Productions to capture your story.
If you know a person or an organization impacting our city, we want to hear about it. You can contact us at 814-944-1948 or by email at stories@jointhecity.org. As we continue today, we take a behind-the-scenes look into the ministry of Dr. Peter Joudry, as God is using him in unique ways in our community.
Well, it's always good to talk about yourself. It reminds me of the narcissist who said, well, enough about me. What do you think about me? Anyway, so I was born in Canada 61 years ago, and I've lived in 3 countries. I've lived in 28 homes. One of the things we found out, my wife and I found out just recently, after living so many different places, they say if you pay your bills, you don't have to move as often. So we're going to maybe try to stay for a while, bearing in mind that we have to pay the bills. So I was raised in a Christian home. My parents were both evangelical believers, and they raised us kind of a radical faithfulness to the church and to giving and to our pastors and our leaders and all that kind of thing. Just kind of your fruit of the, through the land, through the earth, through the, I hope you edit this out. Anyway, so they were kind of your kind of really stable people in the church and really raised us, my two brothers. I have two older brothers, Dumb and Dumber. And but anyway, they raised us and to be faithful to the things of God. That's what our family was all about. And when I was, very young, I felt like I was going to go into ministry. Felt like I was going to be a preacher. Preached my first sermon when I was 13 years old. I haven't ever preached a good sermon yet, but I'm still believing God that'll happen. And but started when I was 13, and always was focused on ministry all of my life. In fact, there's this one experience I had where I was kind of out of ministry when I was first married, and didn't have a church and didn't have any prospects, and I didn't have any money, and trying to run the household, and I think we had a baby at the time. And so my father said, well, listen, you can go down and meet one of my friends who's part of this great grocery store chain, and this was in Canada. And you can go down there. They'll put you in their program. They'll put you in a management position. You'll become a retail manager for one of these large grocery store. And so I went to see the gentleman and sat in his office, and it was almost like the Lord was speaking through this man, because he said right to me across his desk, he said, Peter, this is it. There's no more preaching. There's no more running back and forth over weekends to churches. It's over. If you join us, you'll be joining us, and this will be the focus of your life. And I left that office that day and never ever contacted that man again, because I knew that wasn't God's will for my life. I needed a job. We were destitute, but I wasn't going to run from the call that God had for us. And so as a result, eventually some poor church, with no judgment obviously, took us on, and they're still regretting it. Many of them are still in psychiatric care. So, but nevertheless, the Lord helped us, and we've been in ministry ever since. And one of my goals, by the way, is to end my kind of working career, if you call it that, or my calling, is to end it in ministry. I don't want to end my career by selling shoes or anything like that, and I'm not against anybody who does any of that, but I just felt like if God called me, I want to stick to the calling to the end. So I was an educational late bloomer. As I often tell people, high school was the best 7 years of my life. So I was an educational late bloomer. I wasn't a really good student. I went to, originally I went to Bible college and, did that. And then it wasn't until my late 40s that I received a master's degree, a master's of theological studies out of Tyndale in Toronto. And I was living in the United States at the time, but that's where I got the degree. And then it was as a result of a major church upheaval that I became interested in how do churches recover from systemic dysfunction and conflict. What makes it possible for them to recover? What are the key ingredients? And so that's when I signed on with Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, and I received a doctorate in intercultural studies, which is kind of a misnomer for what I study, but nevertheless, that's what it's called. And I really wanted to discover how churches can get from being so dysfunctional to being what we call at prime again. And so it was a great journey, an interesting journey, and it was focused on discovering that. And I still use many of the premises that I discovered during my study. I researched churches that had been dysfunctional and how they recovered, and that's how I came up with some of my conclusions, some of which are valid. I probably was 12 or 13 when I started to feel that way. Probably when I was 15, I was pretty convinced that I was called. As I've said, many of the congregants where I pastored over the years, they weren't as convinced as I was, but nevertheless, I felt like I was called from about the time I was 15 years old. And I would just say this to parents who have children who may feel like they're called: you have to shepherd the call. You can't say, well, here they're called into ministry, and then say, Troy, you know what? Let's make sports the main thing, or let's make being recognized by the community is the main thing. No, my parents were wise enough to say, well, if he's called, then let's do everything we can to keep him where the calling is going to be exemplified, not drained away. And so that's what my parents did that was right. And I remember when my son, who is now a pastor, when he was young, I remember this lady coming to us and speaking to us as parents, and she said, "Raise him like a Samuel." In other words, you get what you invest in. You get a return from what you invest in. Obviously, I'm not against anything in particular. All I'm saying is that if I think God is leading my child in a certain direction, especially in the calling for ministry, that's what I want to invest in so that they'll be most successful in doing that. Right, so I came to a point where, I told the congregation that Jesus told me to leave, and the choir stood up and sang, "What a friend we have in Jesus." So I came to that point, and I'd been on the board of the Nehemiah Project since about 2005 or 6, right when it got kind of focused. But I didn't live here in this area. I lived in various places and pastored and traveled and did consulting and things like that. So when I was concluding my ministry in the state of Indiana, I came here in 2017. And I was working on my doctorate at that time, and of course that takes some time. And so I was able to do both at the same time, and it was a great working relationship, a great fit. And so the Nehemiah Project is the focus of my life now, for the most part. Now I do some other things, but the Nehemiah Project is the focus of my life. And we believe that we can strengthen and build families, faith, and futures by investing in the community and giving them an opportunity to do and see and experience things they otherwise would not have the opportunity to do, see, and experience had it not been for our presence there. So God has given us a strategic place in the community, and we just believe that we want to take every opportunity to not just get kids through a sporting program or get kids to come in for a meal or whatever it is we're doing. It's more than that. We want them to see the love of Jesus and experience God's goodness and say, hey, I don't necessarily have to follow the generations that went before me. I can plot a new path for my life, and my life can be different. And we've seen that already. Of course, we've been operating in the neighborhood since 2005. And the neighborhood has changed dramatically since then. We have been involved in eliminating at least 12 blighted homes. We have built the park, the Hope Community Park. Of course, we invested in the Hope Community Center, which has the Hope Community Church, the Father's House, the Father's Table, has the barbershop. Then, of course, we were a part of the starting of the Foundry, which is the 10-bed residential facility for men who are transitioning from incarceration or from drug rehab, and they're there. And they also have now other houses in the neighborhood. So we partner with them. We're involved, of course, in planning for our townhouses. And then what's going on since 2018 when we purchased the former Wright Elementary School, 77,655 square feet. We have the daycare, the elite performance baseball clinic. We have the gymnasium being used. Our kitchen is producing tens of thousands of meals. So those are some of the things we're doing. And then, of course, other partners coming on board because we still have capacity. So those are some of the things that we're doing there in the community. But there's so much more to be done. And we have so many more things we would like to do. We'd like to have sensory rooms for developmentally challenged young people and their families. We'd like to have the opportunity to have fine arts and where people are involved in music and drama and developing their skills, even people who want to do the technical side like the audio and the visual and all that. And so those are some of the things we want to do. And we just have some desires that we believe will appeal to people and appeal to the variety of talents that are out there. Because somebody comes from a poorer neighborhood does not mean they're any less talented than somebody who comes from a wealthier neighborhood. It just means they haven't had the opportunity to develop that. And so we want to be the conduit for that opportunity.
Made by Vogel is a father and son business that produces high-quality handmade wooden products such as cutting boards, bowls, bottle stoppers, and more. Products for sale can be found on their Etsy site or in downtown Altoona at the Clay Cup. You can't go wrong buying from Made by Vogel.
As we close out today's show, here are a few thoughts from our director, Troy Ferguson.
What you know now. Things you know now that you didn't know a year ago or several years ago. Things that impact the way you act, the way you respond, or even what you expect, all because of something you experienced or learned that you didn't know before. A few years back, I purchased a car that had Bluetooth sync to my iPhone and also had a backup alarm system. My vehicles didn't have that before, and I got along fine without it. But once I started using the sync system with my phone, I rarely ever listened to the actual radio. And once I started utilizing the backup alarm system when parallel parking and such, I realized I can get much closer to the other cars before having to go forward and adjust. Kelly's vehicle, which is newer by the way, does not have either of those features, and I feel lost when driving our van. Okay, maybe that's a little exaggeration, but the point is I thoroughly enjoy these features, and when looking for a vehicle in the future, I want to make sure they have all those features. What's that have to do with anything, you might ask? Well, when you start moving in the dreams and purpose God's intended for you, you experience His guidance, His favor, His spirit, His pleasure in ways that make you never want to go back to the status quo. There are days that I've thought, I don't want the stress or pressure that comes with pursuing God's dream in my life. But I also know that if I wasn't moving forward, I'd get really bored really fast. It's not who God made me. And for most of you, I don't believe the status quo is what God intends for you either. Try something new. Go after something you've never thought possible. Respond to God's crazy dreams for your life, and you will see once you've experienced it, you can't go back to how it used to be. But at the same time, you'll experience a joy and fulfillment that can only be explained as supernatural. The Bible says in John 10:10, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Destroy what? Our hopes, our dreams, our future, our confidence, our peace. But in that same scripture, it also tells us that Jesus came that you and I can have an abundant life. When our focus is on Him and His agenda, we can walk in that security, move in His grace, and experience a fulfillment that can only be found in Him. I don't want to ever go back to a car that doesn't have Bluetooth sync or a backup alarm system. In a similar sense, I don't want to go back to a life without divine inspiration and direction of God. Life more abundantly is the direction I'll go. I trust you will too. Have a blessed week.
That's all the time we have today. Thank you for watching Joy in the City, True Stories. Let me encourage you to watch other episodes of people and organizations having an impact on our community on ABC 23 at 5:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. every Sunday. You can also catch us each week on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Until then, be encouraged because God is moving in our city.